Hey there, and welcome back to the Balance Journey. I'm so glad you're here. Today we are talking about holding boundaries with when family pressures you. That can be such a test and a challenge, even though you might be good at boundaries in a lot of other scenarios. That special emotional pressure of family can really lay on the guilt, the obligation, and then you have that weight of family history, and all of that can lead to frustration. I know how it is, and I think that none of us has ever been able to fully escape it. But we don't have to abandon our boundaries and our decisions just because we feel bad in those moments of pressure. So in this episode, what we'll do is we'll focus on two very common family pressures. The first one being where everybody expects you to always say yes, right? Or do the things you've always done. And the second one is where people in the family are expecting you to follow the traditions or the belief systems, even if maybe you've kind of outgrown them or you've moved beyond them. And to tackle these family pressures, what we're doing is we're looking at a mind, heart, and spirit approach to transform boundary holding. To transform that from an emotional battle where you are always in this just want to escape or I just want to avoid my family, to a grounded and faith-based practice, which will help you to stay true to yourself and even when family pressures feel hard to handle. So let's get started on that.
This is the Balance Journey, where we're all about turning challenges into growth opportunities and bringing mindfulness to everyday life.
Okay, so we're looking at three steps that we can take, and they kind of all overlap with each other, but they also require to be in this order because it starts with step number one, where you recognize your emotions and you get clear on your why. And this is all about self awareness because, we have a lot of our own emotional stories and mind games that happen as we slip into old family dynamics. And it can be very detrimental to be stuck in all of the, well, I guess I should, or, nobody ever respects me, or whatever your stories are to yourself that make you want to, oh, I don't like that feeling. So I'm gonna overcompensate, or I'm going to please them, or I'm going to forget about my boundary and I'm going to go ahead and do what they're asking me to do. So all of those things, they can really flare up whenever we're back in family dynamics. I mean, we all know that, and I think it's just important that we recognize that's normal. It's normal and it's a common experience. And we started this emotional default thinking long before we probably were even conscious. You are always, because like I say at the Balance Journey, as mind, heart, spirit beings, we're always gauging, we're always watching all the dynamics around us. Well, in the family unit, we've always reacted and responded as such. So if you find yourself always slipping back into those old patterns, and now you're like, okay, I need to recognize my emotions, then this self-awareness aspect is very much going to help you. It definitely has helped me. And also getting clear on your why, like why is it important to hold boundaries? It's always because now I need to realize that all of this looking for balance, I always ignored my own balance. And so now I've lived enough outside of my family dynamic or whatever, and I'm ready to say, I know what it's like to feel settled and feel centered in, just listening to God, listening to life, and analyzing things here. So I don't need to be so shaken up every time, I get these pressures from outside. So the why of your holding your boundaries is important. You have to understand that really the most essential why is I know what it's like to feel settled and to feel centered. And the boundaries are saying, this is what I can give outwardly, but you can't constantly keep demanding, or you can't constantly keep expecting, because that part is the part that you're changing up for everybody who's used to a different kind of family dynamic from you, right? Okay, so how can we actually apply that? Well, it's really important if you're trying to have more self-awareness. You have to be able to gain clarity. What is really at issue? When I start having dreading the phone call from my mom, or always feeling frustrated in a dynamic with my siblings or something, and you have to be able to say, if there are anything in the things that I always tell myself that aren't true, then help me to start really recognizing for myself, recognize my emotions for what they are. And I think some of the basic emotions that we have, they have a root question behind them. So like if you can say, okay, well, what am I really feeling? And, oh, I'm feeling frustrated. I'm always frustrated in whatever your scenario is with family. Then you might be having to ask yourself the root question, which is, what pattern am I tired of repeating? Because very often that's what it is. Or maybe you feel guilt, when you hang up the phone and you were unhappy or rude, or short with your parent or something, maybe you feel guilt. But here's the root question. What truth am I afraid to honor? What am I not being honest about? And therefore I'm feeling guilty that, I'm not just saying up front, I'm so sorry, but I don't have time to talk to you right now. But instead I stay on the phone and I'm guilty the whole time of not being true to the fact that this is not a good time for me, but I better listen to what they want to say. Or maybe the emotion is overwhelm, where you just having to realize that the root question is, well, where have I lost myself in everybody else's needs? Because we've all done that. Or sadness. Sadness might be the emotion on the most basic level. And if that's the case, ask yourself, because the root question is usually what connection feels missing or imbalanced, And even helplessness. If you feel helpless or just, like you can't be understood, really and truly the root question is, where am I feeling unheard or unsupported? Because usually you're tired of it. You're tired and you're ready to feel differently. And the family dynamics, that's going to be the place that you're really going to truly make your breakthroughs. So when you figure out the actual emotions that are flaring up with your specific family pressure, just make sure that you name it for yourself, because your experience needs words and it needs validation. And then just interrupt the default story, because you might have told yourself, yeah, I needed to stay on the phone, and da 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 da. And whatever default story you told yourself about how short and brusque you were with, the person on the other end, interrupt that story. Be able to say, no, no. If I was more honest in that moment, then maybe I could have been a different person and shown up differently. And just remember, you have layers and layers and layers of this kind of family dynamic and baggage. So don't be too hard on yourself, but be willing to start interrupting that story. That's an important part. And then being able to say, God, I want to bring this to you. Not obviously in the moment when you're on the phone or when you're in the middle of the dynamic, but I want to bring this to you because I recognize that I'm starting to be awake to there's more going on, and I need your help. I need your help to understand myself. I need your help to understand what could I be saying differently? What could I be bringing to the forefront so that there's more understanding between me and my family member? And wanting to do that with the spirit of, working fairly is your first step. Obviously, that's not always the case that, your family's not going to just pressure you back. But wanting to understand yourself so that you can feel better when you interact with your family, that's your why, really at the most essential level. That's what you're trying to do because you want to know, how can I do that differently? And you're realizing that boundaries have to be a part of that approach, right? So that's your first step, it's going to help you to build your own self-awareness. And as you gain clarity on your why, you're actually turning boundaries into an act of integrity. And I just think that's beautiful because it really helped me. I always used to think boundaries were some, kind of negative, not nice thing, but it's not. It's really just boundaries on the way you are going to come forward. And so it's really an act of integrity. It's not having to defend yourself. It's very much a proactive and active thing. And as you have built this self-awareness and continue to do so, you're going to use this self-awareness in step 2. Step 2 is honoring your heart and preparing for pushback. So it's kind of twofold, You have to now start to say, okay, I understand myself better and better, so I want to really honor that. I want to come from this place of more groundedness and a full kind of cleansing, of the old emotional lies and all that stuff that you've done in working with God and releasing that and asking for, a gentling of your heart, but also a firmness of, your value and your worth, and no longer having to chase that with family members and then immediately cave in when they pressure you so that you're like, okay, fine, And so in that sense, you're honoring your heart, but you're also preparing for pushback, because in this phase, as you've achieved some self-awareness, you're learning that, okay, now I have to go into the mix and actually like maybe say when mom calls for the 10th time or something and you don't have time. If you've struggled in the past with being able to say, I don't have time, I've always just said, yes, whatever you need, right? I was like that common family pressure type thing. And now I'm saying no, it's okay. You are able to say, I'm prepared for that. And a good way to do that is to anticipate whenever possible, especially in these recurring types of pressures. Anticipate it. Anticipate that, the first thing that, depending on who it is on the other end, they might argue with you or give you a guilt trip or something. But in any case, just be able to say, okay, yeah, that's what I anticipated. Or, wow, I'm really surprised, even when there's a very valid thing and I'm just speaking up for myself, they're giving me a guilt trip. But in any case, as soon as you are aware of that, recognize it as an unbalanced response. It's not in good faith, is it? If somebody gives you a guilt trip, if somebody gives you an argument, for the most part, that might be a knee-jerk reaction, and maybe they'll come back and say, hey, sorry about that. I should have understood, and I should have been much more forgiving of you needing the time, and I should have, let you go. But if they can't do that, then you're realizing, wow, that's a very unbalanced response. That person is only caring about themselves. That's okay. You can get angry about that. You can honor your heart in all the fact that that's how you feel right now. Wow, I can't believe that, they only care about themselves. And here I am, dealing with my own life, and there's this demand, but I'm not happy with the fact that they're giving me this guilt trip. When you can say, that's how it is, but you no longer let it land and make you feel guilty, haha, that's success. That's progress. That is the beautiful thing about you holding your boundaries and knowing what your why is. It's for your balance, family dynamic balance within your own personal family, protecting the peace, because I know there have been plenty of times in the very beginning where I would blow up at my own family, but I would be so nice to everybody else because I wasn't protecting myself from all of those things that were pressures from the outside, and then my family got the worst of it. So what you are doing and choosing your why, this is very important. So when you are anticipating and preparing for the pushback and you see that, okay, there's an unbalanced response, just know that the more that you can restate, okay, well, here's what I'm capable of. I can talk to you for 5 minutes and then I really have to get off. And then you have to stay on that, right? You have to stay on the 5 minutes. Or you can reiterate, here's what I will do. Whatever that statement is for you, it's okay to say, I acknowledge, when they say, oh, well, okay, fine, okay, I guess you have to go now. You could just acknowledge, yep, I know that's really disappointing, but I'll definitely talk to you again soon, okay? And then you have to hang up. The biggest thing when it's any kind of leaving room for doubt, when you are holding boundaries, when you're wanting to do this successfully, if you leave room for interpretation or doubt, if you leave any ambiguity in that moment, well, we'll see, or maybe I can do a little bit longer or something like that. Just know that you're participating in prolonging the difficulty for that person to understand. This is what holding boundaries is for me and you. So clarity is really going to serve everyone, and the more that you can just stay steady with your boundary, commit to it firmly but gently, you're on the right track. So you're honoring your heart, and as you've prepared for that pushback, you're realizing you cannot be ambiguous in that moment. If they're saying, hey, can you do this? And you really want to say no. If you say, well, we'll see, or well, maybe I can, that's confusing. And if you know already, then definitely don't confuse the issue. Just be okay with saying no. And then just be prepared. We all have to practice this. We definitely are going to get better at it. And, we will always be able to pave the way with communication. Communication will neutralize a lot of this pressure. Proactive communication, getting ahead of it. Just remember that if step one was about self-awareness and about focusing on recognizing those emotions and finally paying attention to them and saying, okay, well, I don't want to feel this way anymore, and I'm not going to blame everybody else for that, as a lot of it is my own stories, a lot of it is my own habits. And then just getting clear on your why about what you are holding boundaries for, you're holding boundaries for your sense of balance and your sense of peace. Then this step two, you started to really, as you are having to hold those boundaries with others, you're starting to focus on the fact that you're going to have to honor your heart in this. You're going to have to honor that leading from the heart that has come in those times when you were really doing your self-awareness work, and prepare for that pressure. It's not really going to be that bad if you work hard at proactively sharing, hey, the next time I'm noticing that I'm all on the phone a lot, so I'm going to be spending less and less time on the phone. Whatever you are doing, you are just paving the way. It still might meet deaf ears until you really start to set that boundary and hold it. But that's what step one and step two can really do. And then step three, it's really about settling into boundary holding as a spiritual practice. It's kind of a self-discipline aspect. And, we have to learn to discipline ourselves to move through discomfort. That's what step three is saying, even if I get pushback, even if I feel pressure, it's not the end of the world. Like, what am I really afraid of losing? A lot of what I've always noticed about myself is, I'm afraid of losing status. I'm afraid of losing what everybody thinks of me when I do all these things for them. It's an ego boost in a lot of ways. And yet I always had to shift it. And I think you have to shift it to, okay, but what am I choosing in replacement of that? Because you're not supposed to really lose anything when you set boundaries, especially not with family. It should be a give and take, even though it takes a little bit of reshuffling when we, figure out new dynamics, as grown-ups and dealing with the pressures of extended family and everything. So if you feel like you really are losing something, family members are shutting you out, then what did you really have to begin with in that relationship, Because you have to remind yourself that the things that you are choosing in this and the things that you will gain by holding your boundaries is that you are choosing self-honesty. You're choosing your integrity, because you can't lie to yourself anymore. That's really why you've had all of the nagging, guilty feelings and emotions that you've had, that you had to face in step one. So you can't lie to yourself about that. You have to become self-honest and say, that was a warped relationship, and if we're going to have a new relationship, then I have to do some of the work by holding these boundaries. And you're also choosing your family. You're choosing you and your family. The immediate focus and the extended family has to be secondary. The work you did in humbling yourself and recognizing spirit's nudges in step one, all of that is helping you to respect your own thoughts and to understand your emotions, and so that you can live more wholeheartedly in how you think and how you move forward, how you lead. And all of that is super important in the kind of legacy you're trying to leave with your own family. You're going to one day be the extended family, So right now with your immediate family and with yourself, that's what you're building. And so, the other common pressure that families will put on us is, the pressure to keep everything status quo. And as you're holding boundaries and you're saying, I'm not doing things that like everybody else is doing or whatever, that is going to shake up the status quo, and they might pressure you on that. So, it's okay. We can think differently from each other, and we do not all have to turn into feuding family members just because we don't agree. It takes proactive communication. If you have something that you say, okay, here's how I'm a little bit veering off from what is the norm in our family dynamic or whatever. It takes communication. How are your choices, your actions, your way of upholding the values, your family values? Usually you're not so off in a different direction. You're just saying, but I see myself expressing love in this way, and you see yourself expressing love in this way, or whatever it is, right? And example for you real quick is when we decided to start homeschooling our children. It was before our eldest was even of school age. And when I first got the idea, to me, that would have been, this is why I'm giving you the example, it was definitely veering away from everybody attending elementary school and, going through the whole system. So when I discovered that there was such a thing as homeschooling, first and foremost, I went to God, and I was just, I didn't go straight to like an altar or something, but it was just, as I'm contemplating this, like, wow, what an idea. Being a Montessori trained teacher, I definitely had the background to say, well, at least in the very early years, I think I could manage this. But it was the concept, and the whole philosophy that it just, I was very much inspired by. And so as I'm starting to think about it, I'm immediately telling my husband, hey, so this thought's starting to come up, and I've been reading about this and about that, and I would share bits. And I really feel like that's a proactive communication, in even with my own husband, being able to say, we're possibly going to veer off, and it's not so much that I'm holding a boundary, but it works in the same way. There's going to be a change of the status quo. And instead of wanting you to pressure me back into, okay, let's take that off the table, I'm wanting to bring it forward as let's consider it. Obviously, with family pressures from the outside and you having to hold boundaries, you're not necessarily going to come to them with, hey, I'm thinking of changing things, and what do you think about it? That's always only with your immediate family unit. But in the sense that the proactive communication is necessary, you've got to first start with understanding where you're at with it. And that's, like I said, step one. So I went through step one real quick with God, and for months, I was thinking about it and praying about it, and then bringing it to my husband every so often, well, what if we did it this way? Because he immediately said, I don't know what you're talking about. That sounds off the wall. It was way before it was more common for homeschooling. And even then, it's new to you, then it still sounds like it's off the wall. So it came to a point where, we addressed objections. We said, well, maybe you could look this way, and maybe it could look that way. And I was never just saying, here's how it's going to be. It was more saying, I'm considering this, and I'm wanting to keep this open door. So step one, you're figuring it out for yourself, and you are then saying, okay, I'm ready. I'm ready to tell our extended family. And that's like step two, where you're going and saying, hey, we're going to homeschool. This is what it's all about, and so forth. And this is the things we talked about. These are the obstacles we anticipated, and just preparing their minds to understand that we've thought this through, and here's our decision. And then here now, in step three, this idea that, okay, well, here you are. Shaking up the status quo, but realizing that for us, well, this is a type of spiritual discipline. It's holding steady with something that a lot of other people are like, what are you doing this for? And all through this last step, it's really about settling into that practice of just holding steady. It's an act of faith out of self-respect. It's an act of trust in the guidance you're getting, in the sense you have about the rightness of the direction you're going, and then just being humble to honor that and to do your best to live it fully. And nowhere along the way in our homeschooling journey did we know that it would be all the way through to high school, and that all of them would head on to college after that. We only knew what we were starting with. But every time there was a challenge, every time there was a pushback or pressure, whether it was from family members, which that didn't happen hardly at all, but with, people who you say, oh yeah, we homeschool, and then they're like, you're ruining your kids or something, there was pushback and pressure every time. It was settling more into the, is this right for us? And boy, did it rattle me at times, but that's okay. We can be rattled by the pressures from outside, and we can still say, that's okay. I've recalibrated, I've checked in and said, God, are we still on the right track? Is this still for us, for what we intend? And, always open to that guidance. And as long as it was, we just kept moving forward. We maybe made some adjustments, but really and truly, it was a practice of trust and a practice that you make personal for yourself. And so, in conclusion, now I just want to recap that these three steps: recognizing your emotions, getting clear on your why, and then honoring your heart and preparing for pushback as you go forward and you state your boundaries or state your intentions, and then settling into boundary holding as a spiritual practice as your thing, and how you stay humble in that. I just think that it's so important that we remember we're so supported in every effort we make to find this mind, heart, and spirit equilibrium, this balance that we're trying to settle into first. That's where our desire for boundaries comes from, because we want to feel settled and we don't want the pushback or the pressure from others. We want to feel free to, move forward with this intuitive, spirit-led kind of assurance. So I just think if you communicate with these loving intentions, you are going to establish stronger and actually more authentic relationships. The pressures that you used to feel, a lot of that will fall away. And I really hope that you will be encouraged in that, so that you will stay true to the things that you feel led to hold as your boundaries, and also find a way to clear the mess between you and family members, and praying for that, so that you will find that it really does stop all of this conflict, and realize you don't have to fight each other. You're listening to the leading of spirit, and you're no longer letting that pressure make you into the person you don't want to be. Also check below this video, because I've written 5 self-reflection questions to kind of kickstart you in this process that I've talked to you about today. And I think that that will be a great place to continue, so that you can dig deeper and go further with this content. And also check out my playlist. I've got it here on the screen, of Boundaries Without Guilt. If you are working on setting and holding boundaries, I hope that that will support you. And that's all from me until the next time. I'll see you again on the balance journey.